All right, good afternoon, everyone. This is Rick Stein with the Food Marketing Institute. I am the Vice President of Fresh Foods, and I am really pleased this morning to be able to introduce FishWise to talk about social responsibility and a new project that they're launching for road mapping. FishWise is a nonprofit sustainable seafood consultancy that partners with both retailers and seafood suppliers to address environmental, traceability, and social issues in the seafood supply chain. FishWise is known for their expertise in supply chain traceability and social responsibility, serving as a resource for both private sector and the conservation community. FishWise has worked with us at FMI for many years as a nonprofit advisor on FMI's Seafood Strategy Leadership Council. Today, FishWise will be providing you with a sneak peek at a new project, an online roadmap for social responsibility that they have been developing with the support of the Walmart Foundation. The roadmap provides a compilation of tools, resources, and step-by-step guidance for companies to protect workers in the seafood supply chain and to uphold the best practices in social responsibility. The online platform will launch in March of 2019 and it'll be free and publicly available. For today's call, FishWise will be sharing the prototype of the roadmap and seek your valuable feedback on the utility and relevance of the content and design of the platform. In addition to this feedback session, FishWise is looking for 1 or 2 volunteers, so be ready to have your clickers ready on the chat box and put your hand up, who are interested in working with the FishWise team to test the platform and discuss how your company could potentially utilize recommendations presented to the website. So again, if we're using your input, we think we can develop the best practices and the best platform to help you at the end. If this is of interest, contact me, Rick, after the webinar. I also want to remind everybody online and anyone who registered that after this webinar, within a few days, you'll receive an email with a link that you can listen in and watch the webinar. We are not making the webinar downloadable, but it will be on-demand view. So you'll be able to see it on demand as you need it. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to our speaker today, Nathan Letterberg. He's the project manager for social responsibility at FishWise. And Nathan, with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Oh, perfect. Thanks so much, Rick. Well, I want to start by saying just how much we're thankful to Rick and the FMI team for allowing us to host this webinar today. We appreciate the opportunity to share with this group an exciting project that we've been working on really over this past year. We do know that you're all very busy people, so we definitely appreciate your time. Before I go too much further, again, my name is Nathan Zetterberg. I'm a project manager at FishWise in our social responsibility division. I'm joined today by several colleagues, but you'll primarily be hearing from myself and also my colleague Cora Sorensen, who's a senior project manager in our division. And she'll be chiming in periodically throughout the webinar to relay information that's been provided by you in the chat box. So real quick, before I get into the goals for today, it'd be great if everyone could please just write your name and company in the chat box. And that's just so we can track attendance. It's helpful for us to know who was there or who was here today on the webinar. While you're doing that, I have a couple of housekeeping items. So we'll be using this next hour, to Rick's point, to really seek your valuable feedback on a variety of aspects of the project. To do this, we'll be using the chat box a lot, but we'll also be using the polling feature. I know a lot of webinars, you sit there, you listen to the information. What we're doing today is really intended to be interactive, although there's not necessarily going to be opportunity for people to speak up for the sake of time. What we will be doing is having you enter information in the chat box as well as using polls for us to capture that data, that information from you. For the sake of time, like I said, we won't be able to go through everything that's put into the chat box, but please know that every piece of feedback you give to us is valuable We will be reviewing all the comments, ideas, and questions thoroughly after the webinar. And again, my colleague Cora, there will be moments where she will join the call to speak to some of the things that have been brought up in the chat. So Rick did a great job of giving you all an overview of the project itself. I also know some of you, maybe many of you, were at the recent FMI meeting where my colleague Ashley Greenlee presented an overview of the roadmap. So I'll skip that for right now and just move directly into the goals for today's webinar. You know, today what we're looking for is to gather your feedback. You know, ultimately the success of this website is going to depend on it being relevant and it being useful for industry. So we'll be looking for your insight really on two levels. One is content-wise. So we'll be looking at how can we develop guidance, resources, and tools, as well as potential networking and connecting opportunities that fill gaps for industry and help fill in the space for companies. The second part is we'll be asking you about how the content is presented. So really what we're getting at there is kind of the look, the feel of the site, how you engaged with the material. I do want to stress that this is a prototype of the website. It's beta version, and it's still very much in developmental mode. And we're in the process of collecting stakeholder feedback still. So the information and the site as you see it today will change and adapt over time. So I'm going to pause here just to check the functionality of the website. I have a test poll here. So if everyone could take a moment to fill out the poll. It should be up on your screen now. So I'll give everyone 10 to 15 seconds to fill it out, and then we can share the results. All right, looks like most of the votes are coming in. I'll give a couple more seconds. All right, so based on the results, it looks like most of you have eaten seafood. Of course you have. It's the right group to ask that question to. It's also good to note that none of you said hate this stuff. So seems like you're in the right line of work. So appreciate that. It's good for us to test the functionality and just again get the engagement. This is how it's going to go today. We're going to be asking questions and have you engage right away. So with that in mind, I'm going to now transition away from the PowerPoint and share with you the website. So if you could give me 1 second, pull that up. All right, you should all be seeing the website now. Cora, please chime in if it's not sharing correctly.
Looks good. Just recommend full screen.
Okay, it should be full screen now. Hopefully everyone can see that.
Excellent, great.
Okay. All right, so what you're looking at here today, everyone, is the homepage of the website. So obviously you can immediately see there's a video playing in the background focusing on a seafood worker. You see the RISE logo with what's a thumbprint with waves behind it, the word RISE. The definition of the acronym, so Roadmap for Improving Seafood Ethics. And then this tagline that we'd been workshopping for a while now, couldn't get it right, and then actually Rick and the FMI team put it together perfectly in the email they sent out. So just kudos to the FMI team for putting together our words so good here. But build a responsible seafood supply chain step by step, kind of as a descriptor for what this is. So I'm going to pause here because we're actually really curious about your first impressions. So just based on this portion of the website, you know, the web page alone, the acronym, the descriptor, we'd love to know what your expectations are and what you're hoping you'd find and what you'd hope this website will provide. So if everyone could just take 30 seconds to jot down a few words or thoughts into the chat box, we're going to pause and just provide an opportunity to get some initial feedback on just this opening of what you think this website will do. So I'll pause here, and then Cora, if in about 30, 40 seconds, if you could just share out some of the things that people mentioned, I'd appreciate that. And as you're doing this, I'll just share that, part of this, why we're doing this is because it helps us to understand, not only what expectations users will come to the website with, and how we can best meet those, but also, what does the name of the project evoke? Where does it resonate, and where does it not hit the mark? So Cora, I don't know, it looks like some thoughts have come through. Would you mind sharing if anything's come through the chat box?
Yeah, not yet.
Okay.
But we do encourage you to continue to chime in if thoughts do come.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll move on, but yeah, if anyone has any specific thoughts, please feel free to share those in the chat box. And Cora, if something comes up in the next couple seconds, please feel free to chime in.
Will do.
All right, so what we want to do is I'll just scroll through the basic homepage so everyone can see really what the homepage is made of. So first you'll have this section, the intro section. Below that, we have really what the heart of the website is. It's broken up into 3 primary parts, the challenge, guide and tools, and referral hub. I'll get to those in a second. Below that, we'll have, we're planning on having a Git-oriented video. So something where users can kind of learn about the unique features of Rise and how this platform can help you, also how to use the website. Below that, a goal of ours would be to have testimonials of companies that have used it. But for now, I'm going to go back up to this portion of the website. I'll pause here. Cora, it looks like some chats have come through. I'm not sure if they are regarding the name, but if they are, feel free to chime in before I move on.
Sure, we have a comment that says that the website looks interesting. They're curious about what the logo represents. Also suggesting a get started button for users.
Okay, great. No, that's great feedback. I can answer quickly the logo. It's obviously still in test mode, but the logo is meant to represent kind of the people behind seafood. So you have the waves and the thumbprint. It's something we're workshopping. So if you have any specific feedback regarding that or any thoughts, please feel free to share that with us. We're very much in the phase of taking in that feedback and adapting to it. So with that, I'm going to move on to the next section of this. So the framework for this website is really broken up into 3 primary parts. So you have the challenge bubble here on the left, guide and tools, which is really the heart of the website. And then to the right, we have what we're calling the referral hub. And we'll go through each of these sections, starting with the challenge. Below this section is the video again, and then testimonials below that. So just keep in mind that we're shifting away from the homepage now to the challenge section. Okay, so this section is going to really provide an overview of the issues of human and labor rights in seafood. So it's going to highlight the primary risks, showcasing videos here on the right developed by some other organizations that really introduce companies to the topic. Again, the goal of this is to provide some background information, but also to engage users while using different platforms, not just text, but also what are some of the videos out there that can be more engaging and really tell the story in a meaningful way. Below that, we have a section entitled right now, A Global Problem. In this section, we highlight the main investigative journalism stories that first brought exploitation in seafood into public view, and touch upon examples of stories from beyond Thailand, really to make the point that this issue has a global reach. It's not just Thailand. There's not just one specific region to focus on, but that this issue has been found all over the world. Below that, there's a section focusing on companies' obligation to comply. And what this is doing, what this section really has, is listing kind of what are those international frameworks that companies are obligated to comply with. So we'll provide information on that legislative environment, facing companies, regulatory obligations for companies to comply, and disclose or establish efforts to reduce the risk of forced labor and modern slavery. As a note, all of these categories will be fleshed out further in both depth and content. But for now, this gives you just a quick overview of the topics that we intend to cover in this section. So I'm going to pause right now, and we have another poll that I'm going to pull up for everyone. So I've launched that poll right now. So if everyone could just take 15 to 20 seconds to fill this out so we can capture that information. We're really asking, based on these three primary topics that we've discussed, do these categories provide enough information for companies? So if everyone could just take a few moments, fill that out, and then I'll share the results afterward. And again, if you answer no, it would be most useful for us if you could provide, what are some of those ideas of what else could be added? So if you could just also shift away from this and then from the poll and then enter that information in the chat box so that our team can capture that information, we'd really appreciate it. So it looks like we're about halfway through, so I'll give a few more seconds for people to enter their answers. All right. So we had about 18 people vote on this one. A lot of you said yes, but it's not overwhelming. It's about equal with I don't know. So that's really good information for us to know is maybe that's something that we can follow up with you guys specifically about, present some ideas of what else potentially could be included in this section. So appreciate that. And then again, if you're one of the three people who said no, it'd be really great if you could provide some more context of what else should be added by using the chat feature. So thanks so much for that. So now I'm going to move us along to the next section, which really, again, is the heart of the project here, which is our guide and tools section. So if you could just give me 1 second, pull up that screen. So the guide and tools section is really the heart of the roadmap. As you can read in this yellow strip above, at the top, this section provides actionable recommendations and resources to advance social responsibility. These recommendations have been developed in consultation with 2 leading human rights and labor rights organizations, really to help ensure that we're reflecting best practices on the ground, and then also their experience in working directly with companies on human and labor rights due diligence. So for this next section below, I'll be sharing the way in which we broke up the seafood supply chains into 2 unique groups. So be sure to listen to these descriptions and provide us with any recommendations you may have in the chat box. There'll also be a poll at the end of this section. So a key characteristic of the recommendations that follow in this section is our identification of the audience for these recommendations as buyers and employers in seafood supply chains. Now, given the complexity of seafood supply chains and all the various segments of the supply chain, we've thought a lot about how to structure guidance in a way that identifies commonalities across the supply chain. From a labor perspective, most companies play roles in supply chains as either buyers or employers. The buyer role referring to a company's need to consider human rights risks to operations really upstream, downstream. A buyer could be a multitude of different types of companies, but imagine a company that purchases products and also sells products to someone else. So looking at kind of both up and downstream. And for an employer role really refers to a company that directly employs workers. So that's fishers, that's people on aquaculture farms, people working in processing plants, etc. So And those really need to establish safeguards for the welfare of those workers in their own operations. So we recognize that a lot of companies will fall into either one of these roles, but in many cases, a company may be both a buyer or an employer, and an employer. So recommendations for both buyers and employers are provided. And then below, this is where we lay out the description of the roles to help users understand the distinction. So, for instance, need to consider risks across entire supply chain and need to ensure compliance with your upstream, downstream business falls under buyer, whereas employer need to assess risk and ensure best practice with your own business operations, manage human and labor rights conditions in your own supply chain. So just two examples of how those are broken out. So I'm going to pause here, and we have another poll for you all to complete. So I'm launching that right now, and it's really just getting at to the heart of it. Do these terms, buyer and employer, as they have been described, make sense to you? And is this something that you could identify yourself as? So I'll give another 30 seconds for people to fill this out. Looks like we're about 65% in. If anyone hasn't voted, please vote in the next few seconds, and then I'll end the poll. All right. So an overwhelming 18%. So everyone who voted on this one said that these terms make sense. That's really good for us to hear. So if there's anyone who didn't have an opportunity to submit their answer to this poll, and you don't think these terms work, then please provide us with that information in the chat box. That's something we'd really appreciate. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing that now and go back to the website. So scrolling down a little bit further, I want to move us to the framework for the entire website. So for this section, I'm going to be asking a couple questions on the effectiveness of this framework we have developed. So please listen critically while I walk through this section and really be prepared to answer a couple questions at the end. So here's the primary framework of these recommendations. You know, we've done a lot of research on the social responsibility space, really to review existing guidance documents developed by international agencies, other NGOs, and from other commodities as well. And from that, we've synthesized the main themes of the guidance out there really into three primary buckets. And within those, we developed 4 worker-centric recommendations for each. So in the evaluate and monitor section here on the left, companies can learn about how to assess supply chains for labor risks and how to ensure compliance. This includes recommendations on traceability, risk assessments, including risk that comes from recruitment practices, and importantly, mechanisms for verification of supply chain practices, such as social audits, worker voice, and seafood certifications. The improve section here in the middle provides guidance on how to develop practices that safeguard workers from potential exploitation. Including in this information are topics of responsible recruitment, improving conditions for workers, establishing worker engagement and grievance channels, and providing remedy for workers, as well as building capacity in supply chains through training and collaboration. Shifting over to the right, the third bucket is the communication section, which focuses on the activities of developing social responsibility commitments and communicating those both internally and throughout up and down supply chains. And also it looks at how can companies track and report progress and then publicly communicate their progress on this. So I'll pause there because we'd really like your feedback on the effectiveness of this framework. So please give me a moment to poll get this other poll up. A quick note about this poll, there are 2 questions. So just be sure to scroll down to the bottom and go through all the questions before you submit your answers. So I'm launching that now. Again, I'm going to give about a minute for everyone to fill out the poll. Again, scrolling down to the bottom to make sure that you've completed both questions. So I'll give, it looks like people need a little bit more time. I know there's kind of a lot of information here, so I'll give another 30 seconds for everyone to complete that. I will say if you answered yes for the first question, I see a few people so far have answered yes. If you could provide us with some of the insights that you have on what could be changed or added, if you could put that in the chat box, that we'd really appreciate that. Also, if you'd answered, I have another idea, looks like at least one person has done that for the second question. Please remember to enter that in the chat box also. And I'll give another 30 seconds on this, and then Cora, I'll ask if any of those answers, if any answers have been put in the chat box, if you could share out on that in about 30 seconds or so. Okay, I'm going to end the poll now and share the results with everyone. So it looks like for question 1, split between I don't know and no, with slightly tilted towards I don't know. That's great for us to know. I would love it if anybody has any thoughts or specific ideas or questions. If you could add those to the chat box just so we can capture that information. Or you can email us afterward with specific questions. For the second question, which is what is the best way to structure these recommendations? It looks like a lot of you said providing companies a self-assessment questionnaire to get started could be helpful, with some also saying wouldn't change anything. And then one person saying they have another idea that they'll enter into the chat box. So great information. Really appreciate everyone providing that feedback for us. Cora is, I'm not sure if any people have entered some of that information in the chat box, but is there anything to share out with the group?
No, nothing specific to share at this time.
Okay. No worries. Again, people, if you could please just enter that information. If you'd be willing in the next few minutes, that would be really appreciated. We'd love to have that information so that we can make this work best for you. So now, you know, each of these 12 recommendations in this framework provides further level of content. So to give you a sense of that, I want us to take us to one last page for this website. I'm going to take you to our traceability page here. And in this page, I'm going to be asking you to answer a question about the content of the page. So if it is the correct and appropriate amount of information. So just keep that in mind as I go through and show you this. So this is an example of a recommendation page. You'll see in this dark strip is featured the recommendation itself. The recommendation to companies is to maintain transparent and traceable supply chains and to ensure comprehensive assessment of risk. You'll see above that all of the 12, the framework and all 12 pieces of it are listed here, with traceability and transparency being bolded in yellow so that a user can identify which page they're on real easily. Although right now this is not a linear framework, this is not a set linear process for companies, we did want to list everything so that a user could self-select and identify what's most meaningful for their supply chain and which one of these areas do they need some information and some guidance on. Below this general recommendation to operationalize this guidance is both for the buyer and employer level of guidance. And so for a buyer, you see the specific guidance around this would be identify all segments of company supply chains, require complete supply chain mapping down from the export tier processor to vessel level in order to assess risk. For employers, it's a little bit different, which is maintain clear and updated documentation of company supply chains. So I read those out just as an example, so you could see how the two different segments are broken out. Below this is followed by a section called Why This Matters. And so Why This Matters provides background information and context information on the topic. In this case, for this page, because the recommendation is focused on traceability, a definition of traceability is provided along with general overview of the links between traceability and human rights risks here. So you can see in this document here, titled The Links Between IU Fishing, Human Rights, and Traceability, all to provide that context and that information for a user who may be unfamiliar with seafood traceability and risks associated there. Below that, we have our Take Action section, which really fleshes out high-level recommendations at the top of the page. So this is going to provide more concrete direction on what to do, and most importantly, links to existing resources that have been developed by other organizations, really to help companies take action on this specific topic. Again, in this case, we feature 3 resources that help companies to operationalize supply chain mapping. So we have just a general overview image of a seafood supply chains, followed by 2 tools, the Verite responsible sourcing tool and the supply chain mapping tool. And both of these will be click-throughs and link out to these external tools. And then you'll see on the left there's specific guidance in the bullet points for companies. An example of how we further connect users to existing resources below. Future of Fish has already done a tremendous amount of work to create seafood-specific traceability toolkit, which we feature here on the left with a brief definition. And then there's additional links to resources developed through the OSME collaboration by FishWise, Future of Fish, and some other organizations. The reason we have multiple resources here is because, you know, every supply chain is unique, and some businesses, 1 or 2 of these may be more applicable than others, and we want to elevate the resources that can fit multiple different business platforms. Lastly, another type of referencing we do is to highlight business platforms companies can join related to the topic highlighted here. So you'll see we have the Seafood Task Force, the Global Dialogue on Seafood Traceability, and SALT, the Seafood Alliance for Legality and Traceability. Now, all of these, again, would be click-through that would take you to that site, so that if a company is interested in learning more, they can read through this definition while also being linked out to those additional resources. So to review, for each recommendation page, you know, we're going to feature that high-level recommendation, followed by the guidance specific to buyer and employers, then provide a section on really why it matters, just to give that background context. And then below that, we're going to feature the Take Action section, which is more detail and links to existing resources and tools companies can use for implementation. So I'm going to pause here and pull up another poll for us. Give me 1 second for that. All right, so if everyone could take 1 minute to finish this, fill out this poll real quick, we'd really appreciate it. So it looks like we have about half of the group filled in, so I'll give about 30 more seconds to finish this. All right, great. And that, share the results. So it looks like the majority felt like this is the right amount of content on these pages, wouldn't change anything. But there were a few people who said there's too much content, about 25%. So for those of you who think that this might be too much content and you'd recommend cutting down, it'd be great if you could provide us some of that information or some of your opinion on that in the chat box feature. So, you know, what sections would you recommend cutting out? What do you think is necessary and not, just so that we can make sure that we're tailoring this to the audience. All right, so I'm going to now, I want to ask one more question, and this is again is going to be an open-ended question for the chat box. So I'm just going to put it out there, you know, what else would be helpful? And this can either be content or the layout for this page. We'd love to know if anybody has any specific thoughts. If you could just please put them in the chat box as we proceed with the webinar. You know, this is the guts of the website, and we really want this to be applicable and to meet the needs of industry. And so if you have specific thoughts, this is where we're really calling on you to help us and provide that feedback so that we can make this the best possible tool for you, so that it can meet your needs. So if you could just provide any of that information in the chat box, it'd be really appreciated. And then at the end of the webinar, Cora is going to kind of come up with maybe some thoughts and common themes based on what's been entered already, and hoping some of you can provide us with some more guidance there and some more of your opinion. So I'm going to move us along back to the homepage because I want to talk about one more piece of this website, which is the referral hub. So the referral hub, here the bubble on the right, has not yet been built out, but our goal is to build a page that supports users in finding organizations and companies that can support with implementation if companies need that. So our idea here is that organizations or companies will be divided by their area of expertise and potentially their region of focus as well. So we are planning on right now including NGOs, third-party consultants, and geographically specific on-the-ground organizations. So the question that I have for all of you is to see if you could, are there other types of organizations that we're missing that I didn't include between NGOs, third-party consultants, or on-the-ground organizations? And if you can think of those and there's an organization or a type of company that you'd like included in the referral hub, if you could please just enter that in the chat box, we'll capture that information and we'll make sure to do our best to include all the types of organizations or companies that, that would be useful for you. So I'm actually gonna stop sharing the website here now and move us back to the PowerPoint. So if you could give me 1 second here. So you should all be seeing the PowerPoint. Cora, could you please just confirm that everyone can see the PowerPoint?
Yes, we can see it. Okay,
great. And then Cora, I'll pause here. Is there anything, any thoughts or anything that came through the chat that you feel like is important to share before we transition?
It was interesting. There's one comment here around actually connected to overtime, and this is an interesting issue in social responsibility. It was a suggestion to have a poll for employees at companies to be able to vote on the hours that they want to work. And this, I think, is an interesting question where we recognize that sometimes workers may wish to work overtime, but they're not permitted to due to legal requirements. It kind of points for a need for an ability to customize one's own program. So thanks for that comment. And also just to kind of reflect back what you've all shared, it sounds like the level of content that we're providing is overall in general hitting the mark. And that a little bit more direction on how to interact with the recommendations and the framework, perhaps through a self-assessment, a rapid assessment questionnaire to help you figure out your point of entry would also be helpful. So thanks so much for filling in those polling questions for us.
Yeah, that's super great information for us. So thanks to everyone. We actually have 3 more questions that we are going to ask, and these are really important questions questions to us and really, really get at to the heart of why we wanted to schedule this webinar today. So what we're going to do is I'm going to give a couple of moments here, a couple of minutes actually, of just quiet time for everyone to kind of reflect on what they've seen today and really share your responses to these questions in the chat box. I'll read through the questions briefly and then we'll move on. But of everything you've seen, what parts of this project are most relevant and useful to you today? Second is, what else would you like to see? You know, what is missing? Obviously, we can't show you the whole website. It's not been built out, but you know, with the framework, with everything that we've shown today, you know, what else would you like to see? What's missing? What would be most useful or engaging for you? And then our final question is really, we want to get your thoughts on the name Rise. Any suggestions that you may have. This is something we've been workshopping for a while, trying to get some engagement from industry on this, to know what's sticking about it, what's not. So I'm going to give a couple moments of just quiet time for people to submit their answers via the chat functionality. And then Cora, once we start getting some answers, if you just want to pull out some of those information, some of the common themes that come through, that would be really great.
Will do.
And I'm going to read the questions one more time for anyone who's on the call or on the phone and not on their computer. And if there's anyone who is on the phone, if you could just maybe jot down these answers and send Rick an email afterward, he can forward that along to us, or you could send it to us directly. I'll share my email at the very end. But questions are, of everything you've seen, what parts of the project are most relevant and useful to you? Second question is, what else would you like to see? What is missing? And then the third is, what are your thoughts on the name RISE, the acronym, Roadmap for Improving Seafood Ethics? And do you have any suggestions? So we'll give a little bit more time, and then Cora, again, if you have specific thoughts or specific feedback you've received, then you could share that out.
Sure, nothing has come in yet, but it's also an option if any of you are more comfortable sharing feedback with us via email. We will put Nathan's email up at the end of the presentation, and we certainly welcome receiving emails with critical feedback or thoughts that you might not have wanted to share in the chat box.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we know these are tough questions. These are questions we've been asking ourselves a lot and trying to nail this down. So it's not easy to just quickly come up with the answers to these after seeing a 40-minute website presentation. But yeah, if you have anything specific, again, we have a couple more minutes on the line. So please provide us with those answers, and then yeah, send us an email. The last slide will have my address, and we'd love that feedback and are actively seeking it. So I'm going to move us along now to just the timeline and next steps for this project. So we're in a phase right now, and we have been for a while of really collecting stakeholder feedback. So we've been working with both NGOs and with industry. Industry is what we use, but by that we're referring to seafood companies up and down the supply chain. And we've been really focused on getting this feedback. So we've been using this prototype of the website and sharing it with different groups. And now we've been collecting that, and we're in the process of concluding that process. So we'll be going through a process ourselves of now collating all that information and coming up with, you know, what are the next steps? What were some common themes? What were some things that we need to add, change, adapt to the website? And then in the next couple months, we'll be making that. So we'll have really continued content development. And then the product launch is going to be in early spring 2019. We're looking at March 2019. I will say that this website will be launched then, but we would love feedback before then and even after then, so we can continue to adapt this website and make it work for industry, make it be something that seafood companies can use regularly, will use, and works for them in their supply chain. So just please feel free to provide us feedback at any time. And then moving forward, we're going to circulate a summary of the webinar feedback to Rick and the FMI team. And then we will do some outreach on topic expertise, specific recommendations. So we may reach out to members of this group for specific feedback regarding some of the comments, questions, or recommendations you made in the chat box today. So please look for that. We may follow up with some of you directly regarding some of your thoughts. And then to Rick's point that he mentioned in the very opening of the webinar, we are looking for volunteers for companies who want to partner with us through the next couple months to provide feedbacks at strategic points in the development process before it goes live. So if any of you represent a company that would be interested in doing that, would want to take part to make sure that this website works and has your feedback implemented in this process, please send me an email, send Rick an email. My email is n.zetterberg@fishwise.org, and we'll follow up directly with you on that. So we invite you to contact FishWise directly by email. If you think of something after the webinar concludes, or if you want to share any additional feedback privately, or if you have any recommendations regarding others to contact about this project, feel free to provide that to us. We're honest when we say all feedback and engagement is welcome, so please don't be shy. I want to thank you again for being on the webinar today. We'll definitely be in touch soon. Hope you all have a great rest of your day and a happy holiday season. So thank you very much, everyone.